The night was dark and silent, but inside this prison, the lights never went out. This wasn't just any prison, it was one of the most secure facilities in the country, designed to hold the most dangerous criminals. Located in a remote area, far from the city, it was built to ensure that no one could ever escape. Towering walls, electrified fences, and armed guards stationed at every corner made it an impenetrable fortress. The inmates inside weren't ordinary criminals. They were the worst of the worst. Terrorists, mafia bosses, ruthless killers, people who, if set free, could wreak havoc on society. The government had spared no expense in ensuring this prison was escape-proof. Every guard was highly trained, every corridor was under constant surveillance, and alarms were set to go off at the slightest unusual movement. Yet, within these walls was a man who refused to be caged. He wasn't just another prisoner, he was a mastermind. Intelligent, ruthless, and incredibly resourceful, he had spent years defying the law and had already attempted multiple escapes from other prisons. But this time, he wasn't just planning to escape, he was planning something much bigger. His plan wasn't an ordinary prison break, it was a carefully orchestrated operation involving people on both sides of the bars. Some of the prison's own officers had been corrupted, bought off with money, manipulated with power, or threatened into cooperation. This wasn't something put together in a matter of days or weeks. It had been months in the making. A prison that no one believed could ever be breached was about to face the most shocking jailbreak in history. The criminal's strategy, months of planning, building alliances, and setting traps. A prison escape of this scale wasn't something that could be pulled off overnight. It required patience, intelligence, and the ability to manipulate people from the inside. The mastermind behind this operation understood that brute force alone wouldn't work. He needed allies, both inside the prison and among the guards who were supposed to keep him locked away for months. He observed everything: the guards' shifts, the security cameras, the weak points in the prison's defenses. He memorized routines, noting which guards were strict and which ones could be swayed. Some officers were easy targets, overworked, underpaid, and frustrated with the system. A little money or a subtle threat against their families was often enough to bend them to his will. Others were more difficult, requiring slow and careful manipulation, but he was patient. Inside the prison, he wasn't just a feared criminal, he was a leader. He knew how to control people, and he started gathering followers, prisoners who owed him favors, who feared him, or who simply wanted a chance at freedom. He created a hierarchy within the prison walls, ensuring that every man involved in the escape had a specific role to play. Some were tasked with gathering information, others with creating distractions, and a few were even responsible for smuggling in contraband. But building alliances wasn't enough. He had to set traps as well. He spread misinformation, making it seem like he was planning a different kind of escape to throw off any suspicion. He orchestrated small incidents inside the prison, fights, power failures, and even fake escape attempts to test the guards' responses. Each event gave him valuable data, helping him refine his plan. At the same time, he carefully coordinated with the corrupt officers. Some were in charge of turning off cameras at crucial moments, others had access to cell keys, and a select few were responsible for controlling the prison gates when the time came. The entire operation had to be executed with military precision. One mistake, and everything would fall apart. Months of preparation had led to this moment. The plan was in place, the alliances were secured, and the traps were set. Now, all he had to do was wait for the perfect night to strike, executing the plan, a flawless operation assisted by inside help. The night of the escape was carefully chosen. A night when the guards on duty were the ones he had already manipulated. The timing had to be perfect. Any small mistake could bring the entire plan crashing down. As the prison lights dimmed for the scheduled late-night security checks, the operation was set in motion. The corrupt officers played their roles perfectly. Security cameras in key areas mysteriously malfunctioned, creating blind spots that had never existed before. The alarm system, which was supposed to trigger at any unauthorized movement, was subtly disabled. These technical failures seemed random, but they were all part of a well-calculated scheme. Inside the prison, the mastermind gave the signal. One of his men, who had been instigating fights between inmates for weeks, started another one. A brutal brawl erupted in the common area, drawing several guards toward the commotion. While the attention was focused there, they moved in silence, sticking to the shadows, their hearts pounding as they followed the path that had been laid out for them. Meanwhile, outside the prison, another officer was positioned near the main gate. His job was simple. When the time was right, he would momentarily disable the perimeter alarms and create a small window for the escapees to slip through. But before reaching the gate, there was one final obstacle: the last security checkpoint. To handle this, a staged accident was arranged. One of the corrupt officers faked an emergency radio call, claiming a riot was breaking out in another wing of the prison. Guards rushed toward the supposed riot, leaving the final checkpoint understaffed. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Within minutes, the 30 prisoners moved through the checkpoint, reached the outer fence, and vanished into the darkness. The impossible had happened. One of the most secure prisons had been breached, and the country was about to wake up to the most shocking news in years: the getaway, where the prisoners went after escaping. The moment they slipped past the final checkpoint and crossed the outer fence, the real challenge began, disappearing without a trace. The mastermind had planned every detail, ensuring that the escapees wouldn't be caught within hours like most prison breaks. Instead of running blindly into the night, each prisoner had a specific destination, a clear route, and most importantly, a way to blend in. Outside the prison, 3 vehicles were waiting, trucks driven by men who were either bribed or too scared to refuse. The escapees split into groups, each heading in a different direction to avoid detection. The mastermind had arranged everything: safe houses, disguises, and even fake identification for some of them. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about staying free outside the prison. 3 vehicles were waiting, trucks driven by men who were either bribed or too scared to refuse. The escapees split into groups, each heading in a different direction to avoid detection. The mastermind had arranged everything: safe houses, disguises, and even fake identification for some of them. This wasn't just about escaping. It was about staying free outside the prison. 3 vehicles were waiting, trucks driven by men who were either bribed or too scared to refuse. The escapees split into groups, each heading in a different direction to avoid detection. The mastermind had arranged everything: safe houses, disguises, and even fake identification for some of them. This wasn't just about escaping, it was about staying free. The first group headed toward the mountains, where abandoned cabins and hidden trails offered the perfect hiding spots. They had enough supplies to survive for weeks, knowing that the police would focus their search in the nearby towns and highways first. The second group blended into the city's underground network. Some had connections with local gangs and crime syndicates that provided temporary shelter. Others changed their appearance, cutting their hair, switching clothes, and using public transport to vanish into crowded urban areas. The third group took the riskiest but fastest route, crossing the border. With the help of corrupt officials and human smugglers, they aimed to leave the country before authorities could put their names on international watch lists. The mastermind himself had the most well-planned exit. A private boat was waiting at an isolated dock, ready to take him to a distant location where he could rebuild his empire. By the time the prison sirens blared and the authorities launched a massive manhunt, the fugitives were already miles away. Some were hiding, some were on the move, and a few had already crossed into new territories where law enforcement had no immediate reach. The escape was a success, but the real question remained: how long could they stay free? The entire country was on high alert, and the hunt had just begun: the national outrage and the search for justice. By dawn, the news had spread like wildfire. 30 of the country's most dangerous criminals had escaped from a high-security prison in what was being called the most shocking jailbreak in history. The nation was in chaos. Television screens flashed breaking news, radio stations buzzed with updates, and social media exploded with panic and outrage. How could such a heavily guarded facility be breached so easily? Who was responsible? And most importantly, where were the fugitives now? The government wasted no time in responding. A nationwide manhunt was launched, with roadblocks set up across major highways, airports placed on high alert, and borders closely monitored. Law enforcement agencies, special task forces, and even the military were called in to track down the escapees. The pressure was immense. Every passing hour without an arrest only fueled the public's anger. The prison itself became the center of intense scrutiny. Investigators swarmed the facility, piecing together how such a massive escape had been orchestrated. It didn't take long for them to uncover the ugly truth: inside help. Surveillance footage, missing security logs, and inconsistencies in guard reports pointed to corruption within the ranks. Several prison officers were immediately detained for questioning, and soon arrests were made. The government vowed to punish those responsible, but the damage had already been done. As the days passed, some of the fugitives were captured, found hiding in abandoned buildings, attempting to flee the country, or even turning on each other in desperation. But the Mastermind and several of his key allies remained at large, constantly changing locations and staying one step ahead of the authorities. The public demanded justice, and the government knew it couldn't afford to fail. Rewards were announced for information leading to the capture of the escapees, and international agencies were contacted for assistance. Every lead was followed, every tip investigated, but the criminals had planned their getaway too well. What had started as an unthinkable escape had now turned into a race against time. Would the authorities track them down before they disappeared forever? Or had the mastermind truly outsmarted the system? The entire nation waited anxiously, knowing that as long as these men remained free, no one was truly safe.